Bulletproof Communication Strategy with Measurement. My name's Sarah Curnow. I'm Director of Insights at Commetric, and I'm here today with Jo Perrin, Corporate Communications Director at Verizon.
Hello, everybody.
Verizon and Commetric have been partners since 2006. We produce monthly and annual analyses of Verizon's media coverage in 15 markets around the world. And we're here today to discuss the Verizon Commetric AMEC Gold Award winning entry, which won us the Best Use of Business-to-Business Communication Management Award and the overall International Grand Prix Award. We're going to talk about where the case study sits within the AMEC framework, how Verizon uses the data that it gets from Commetric, and how this informs Verizon's overall communications planning. So here's an overview of the case study itself, at least the objectives and the execution elements. So the measurement objectives were defined as the need to reach senior decision makers, grow coverage volume, and demonstrate value for money in the communications process. The solutions we developed to address these needs were a media tiering system, specific targets for agencies, and the development of an annual report and scorecard, amongst some other things. So feeding into this is analysis across 15 markets in 9 languages using the analysts in our media lab. But it's how this evaluation fits into Verizon's communication strategy that made this an award winner. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Before we dig into the data, we thought it might be worth giving you a little bit of background on Verizon, its business, and its communications objectives. So Jo, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So this slide here really summarises what Verizon sees as its purpose, so to deliver the promise of the digital world. And what we mean by this is that we believe we are at the centre of an increasingly connected world, and a world in which our networks are key to delivering the digital experiences that are vital to our customers' lives and also to business success. And here we go by the numbers, which are really self-explanatory. But it's also worth pointing out the differences in our business inside and outside the US. Inside the US, we obviously have a large wireless and consumer business. For example, as the bullet says, our LTE network reaches 98% of the US population. Outside the US, we're primarily focused on the enterprise market and helping businesses to do business better, so not a consumer brand. And it's the measurement of enterprise communications which is the focus of the work that we do with Commetric. The enterprise team delivers a range of global solutions and services over one of the most connected networks in the world. Every day, this network connects systems, machines, information, ideas, and people at speeds of up to 100 gigabits per second. Our network has over 800,000 network route miles to reach more than 2,700 cities in over 150 countries. Basically, it gives thousands of businesses and government agencies a global footprint on which they can connect, communicate, and collaborate. And when it comes to enterprise solutions, our network platform allows us to securely connect our customers' users and supply chain to any business application, or to Verizon applications such as UCC or collaboration services. And we also offer a range of managed and professional services.
Great, so that's Verizon, the business. It's a big business and it has very complex communication needs. So now we're going to move on to the measurement programme. But first, Jo, can you tell us a bit about how the communications team works?
I most certainly can. So our job is really about telling stories, and these are stories that will resonate with our target audiences and help soften the market for sales. We tell these through the media, at internal and external events, in social, with customers, and through our executives. We operate globally via a hub and spoke model with a small in-house team and an agency network in our key markets around the world. I always feel that communications has got a really privileged position in our business, as we work with just about every group there is across the world, so executive comms, marketing, legal, sales, finance, HR, and many more. Centrally, we have the responsibility for developing messaging and programs and making sure these are delivered well. And we're also responsible for measuring campaign success and reporting back on our work. Our agency teams have responsibility for execution on the ground.
Okay, so this is probably a good time to start to consider the AMEC framework, and perhaps we can start with how you approach the inputs.
Yes, so for me there are a few key areas to look at in measurements. So measuring the performance of our agencies, so we can make sure they're focusing their efforts on activities that are meaningful to the business, reporting back to the business in terms of success, demonstrating value for money. We're a very different proposition to most of the areas that our sourcing team handles, and also ensuring that we're continuously focused on growth. So when you look at the inputs and activities section of the AMEC framework, these really all come together in our agency scope of work documents, which we issue on an annual basis to all of our agency partners. So these are about setting clear and transparent goals for activity in the year in the context of our overall annual PR plan, so that everybody is clear on what they're trying to achieve. So metrics in the SOW include quantifiable activities we expect to be carried out per quarter, targets for coverage in specific tiers of media. So, for example, we expect 30% of our coverage to come in our Tier 1 media vehicles, 10% in business and national. Targets for themes in coverage. We don't want all of our coverage to be in one area, but rather to be balanced across the board. And also volume, as we expect our agencies to grow their penetration in their markets year on year. And when it comes to setting activity targets, we broadly follow an in-agency billable hours model. So again, there's transparency. The central team all comes from an agency background, so we know there's no point in trying to set unachievable targets, but we also know what it's fair to expect our agencies to do. Our agencies are reviewed every 6 months and are expected to report back against their targets, and we also refresh our media tiering regularly to ensure that we really are reaching out to those vehicles that matter most. But by setting out clear targets and demonstrating progress towards these, it's easy to be able to show that the programme is on track, or to track any potential issues. And of course, last but not least, the central team is also working within the business to continually refine overall communications objectives. It can be that PR activities need to be tweaked mid-year to ensure they're still in sync with the business itself.
Great, and so the reports that Commetric produced for Verizon are designed to feed into this overall process. We review the design annually, and that makes sure that the analysis supports these business goals and the changing communications objectives within that. We provide qualitative and quantitative analysis against a range of different areas. So we look at key search terms, we focus on themes, vertical industry penetration, media tiers and specific markets. And we also measure media messaging, spokespeople presence and top influencers. The key measurement challenge for Verizon, and of course for us, is differentiating Verizon enterprise coverage from the overall Verizon coverage. There's always so much discussion of Verizon in the media about its corporate activity. And it's all, of course, interesting because it's continually pushing brand awareness, but it's not supporting the specific objective of telling the enterprise story and informing decision makers in Verizon's target audience about how technology can help them do business better.
Yeah, and this is where the fact that the Commetric team incorporates real people comes in. So it's important for me to be able to know that any analysis I'm doing is on clean data. I need to be measuring performance accurately if I'm to use it to plan and evaluate accurately. I think people often confuse monitoring and measurement, but for me there's a very clear line between the two. So I like to know what all the Verizon noise is in the market, but if I'm measuring my agencies and reporting back on my team's work to the business, I need to be sure I'm talking about things that we've touched.
Absolutely, and even just within the enterprise space, there's a lot of different news triggers that we can track against. And what's great for us at Commetric is that we're part of the agency team for Verizon. So that means we join the weekly team calls, we've got insight into what's coming up around the world, and it really helps us understand what the company is trying to achieve. So if there's a major program coming up, like the data breach investigations report, there might be an executive visit, or maybe a specific story that's being pitched. We know about this up front, which really helps us focus our measurement, so we're focusing on the key concerns during the programme.
It's probably useful to talk a little bit about what we get from the Commetric report. So firstly, we have an exec summary page, and this gives us an overview of all our key information in one go. So what's our Tier 1 media visibility, our key news drivers, our top themes in the month, they're all there. But we also get an independent view of the month from the Commetric team based on what they've seen from the data, and that's invaluable.
Excellent. We also provide a key metrics slide. So this helps Verizon track very easily their KPIs on a month-by-month basis.
We also look at themes across the board. Remember, of course, this forms part of the agency SOW. The chart here shows a big focus on security and IoT across most of our different markets, as well it should, because in this month we launched both an IoT report and our annual data breach investigations report in the security space. So in this way, we can ensure that we're not getting too stuck in any one individual theme bucket, which would misrepresent the overall scope of what we have to offer as a business.
We also track volume, which of course is self-explanatory really, but it's always interesting to go back and see what's caused any coverage spikes. We also have an interactive dashboard, and this lets Verizon drill down into what may have caused that spike and really get under the skin of the coverage.
Audience reach is critical, and again, this is part of the agency SOW. We really want the agencies to be focusing on high value coverage, which is really going to make a difference for our business. We actually now only measure against our top tier media, tier 1 and 2, as these are the vehicles we've identified as being most meaningful for us. We can sometimes get spikes in other coverage though, which will come up in the report. For example, if a news agency interview results in regional media coverage. But that's then something which we can discuss in our ongoing dialogue with our agencies, and it will also be pulled out in agency reviews.
And we track spokespeople penetration. So these are the people that are being most quoted every month.
Yes, and this can sometimes pick up on media speakers that we don't know about, which can be another interesting challenge. But mainly, what we're trying to look at here is, are our interviews getting traction? Are our spokespeople being mentioned? Are we asking too much of some people? Is it all the same person who's actually being quoted? Is the spokesperson mantle being shared efficiently? This tracking enables us to see all of that.
And finally, but very importantly, we're looking at the coverage drivers. So this helps track messages and how frequently they're occurring.
So this enables us to see what stories are gaining traction, and also picks up, for example, on speaking engagements, interviews as well. We track these messages month on month throughout the year, which then enables us to see at the end of the year which stories have worked best and which have not. And this helps us determine where we should be focusing our efforts in the following year, but specifically if we need to look at doing things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to that point, we've worked with you for a number of years now, nearly a decade, and we're able to track some core data over time. So we've done some quite detailed analysis of the launch of the Data Breach Investigations report, and this is a key report for Verizon. So what we're looking at here, just to go into these charts in a little bit more detail, the top chart is showing us year-on-year coverage for each report, but it also shows the coverage from the previous year's report. So we can get some understanding of the tail of the coverage, if you like. So if we look at 2015, for example, we can see that the 2015 report achieved 666 pieces of coverage. However, that year there was also coverage from last year's report, the year before, and the year before that.
Yes, and what this really shows is that as the data breach report has become established in the market, it really has become almost like an industry reference point. So it continues to, references to it continue to be seen in security-related articles right up until the launch point of the next edition.
Absolutely, and we've also had a look at the launch date and how that impacts the pickup of coverage of the report. So, for example, if you look at July 2010, just over 6 years ago there, we can see that the coverage related to the report was 39% of the whole coverage that month. If we look at April last year, when the report was released in April, the coverage for the report was 71%, so far, far higher, whereas the rest of the coverage was 29%.
And so this is important because, remember, we've actually set our SOWs up at the start of the year, working on actually extending beyond our volume, our targets, which we achieved on the previous year. So if the report launches early in the year, then it means that we actually are expecting to get quite a high volume of coverage in that long tail throughout the year. If we launch later in the year, we won't get that, so our overall volumes will be down, which means we need to be prepared to address that by doing perhaps some other activities to make up for that, perhaps earlier on in the year or later on in the year again. So actually having this volume of data available means that we can actually track impact over time, but it's also just really invaluable in planning what we need to do to be able to reach our goals.
Okay, and so doing analysis like this also plays into the outtakes and outcomes area of the framework, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. But I think it's also worth saying as well that there are many other areas listed in the framework that Verizon measures separately. So, for example, in the social space, we produce standalone monthly reports, which are English only, all Verizon mentions, but include all the standard measurements, so, followers, impressions, resonance, engagement, views, etc. We also measure activity related to our LinkedIn exec program and also activity on our key social platforms, so LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Slideshow, etc. We run a measure against a social advocacy program for employee social engagement, And of course, the marketing team also has substantial metrics to cover its own activities. So our measurement is just one area in a much bigger framework, but one that itself is, I think, extremely comprehensive.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's great to know for us. And also, it's great to know that our measurement fits into the wider measurement picture and complements it. It's also great to see that we understand that it feeds into lots of the other outputs that you produce. We've got some examples of those.
Yes, so we pull together all of our information into an agency scorecard, which tracks all activities on an ongoing basis. We produce weekly updates, which are sent across the business and have great penetration into the exec teams. We have our agency activity reviews every 6 months on a 6-monthly basis. The data all feeds into that and much, much more. So it's really quite a comprehensive programme.
Yeah, it looks great. And what sort of audiences do these go to?
So these go to all the way across the business, really. So from the very top of the business down to all of our spokespeople, our subject matter experts, everybody.
Okay, wonderful.
I think when it comes to talking about why measurement matters, this quote probably sums it up, which was also part of our submission for the AMEC award. So having independent eyes analyse our coverage means that we can be sure we're getting an objective viewpoint. There's a line in the Verizon credo, which is kind of really our rules for doing business. Our best was good for today, tomorrow we'll do better. And that really informs how we approach our business every day. But being able to know how we're performing today is really critical if we're able to focus our efforts and our resources effectively in the future.
Brilliant. Okay, Joe, that was wonderful. That was a great run through of the programme that we do with you and how it helps you in your achieve your objectives in comms and report back to the business, and also how that contributed to the AMEC award. It's so important to us that our reports are used and have great outcomes, that they're not just sitting in the corner of a room and no one's, it's just a tick box, that people are actually altering strategy and it affects the communications programs that are being put into place. So thank you, that's really great to hear about. We've just started to have a few questions coming through, so I'll just say to people listening, if you do have any further questions, please put them forward now and we can answer those. I'm just looking at one here which is quite interesting about pushback from someone just wanted to know whether you had any pushback from local teams and agencies. So, for example, heaven forbid, that they don't agree with any of the metrics or some of the measurements being put in place. How would you handle something like this? How do you ensure that the local markets are on board to support this approach?
Well, I think, firstly, we really view our agencies as being part of our team. So they are part of our team out in all of the individual markets in which we operate. So there's an ongoing dialogue. There's an ongoing dialogue when we do set up the SOWs. So there are different activities which work better in some markets than in others. And also, obviously, things change throughout the course of the year. So it could be that a market has been drowning in executive visits and executive interviews, which will mean that those have been a big focus of activity. And it will mean that, for example, feature activity will have tailed off during that same period. But then all of this comes out in the agency reviews. And of course, there's always got to be a bit of give and take in terms of how you work this. But I think by actually establishing things in a very transparent way up front, then we can all be clear on what it is that we're trying to achieve. And then you can explain why there is some give and take. But if there's no explanation, then that becomes a problem.
Okay, yeah. So it's a partnership all the way through the line, as it were, isn't it? Right.
Absolutely.
From the beginning, strategy setting, through to the activity, and then at the end measuring out and then feeding back around again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also part of the review process is to plan for the next 6 months of activity. So we can look at what's actually worked well in the first 6 months of the year, what are we going to do again, what are we not going to do, what are we going to do differently. So it's always a dual focus, really, looking back and then taking those learnings so we can put them into the programme to see what we want to do next.
Okay. And I suppose on the other side of the coin, as it were, do you have to incorporate measurements of things from head office?
Well, Well, so we get, as I say, these regular reports, for example, on the social piece. That all comes down to us as well. So we've got quite a comprehensive range of inputs which come into us, so that we can actually refocus different aspects of our programme overall.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay. So a bit of advice here. If there was, say, a communications team wanted to put in place something like this, a multi-market media measurement programme, what would your advice be? I mean, you may have touched on some of that with the planning, and also, how would you justify the expense?
Well, I think really it comes down to knowing what it is you're wanting to measure up front and why. And I think this really comes back to those 4 buckets that we spoke about right up front. So, I mean, for me, I'm wanting to look at agency performance. I'm wanting to be able to report back to the business. I need to be able to demonstrate that we are giving value for money, and also to ensure that we're focusing on growth, so growing our penetration year on year.
Okay. Okay, so we have a question here about, does the Commetric report get seen by C-suite management?
So we're actually just in the process at the moment of actually revamping our intranet presence. But we actually have a presence on the intranet which is open to anybody in the business, where we put our reports, our key results, our key coverage documents, all of those sorts of things on a month-on-month basis. And that's where the dashboard sits as well. So it's a link through to the dashboard, which goes there too. So that's open to anybody in the business. And again, the transparency piece is quite important here.
Okay, so anyone can tap into it. And do you have to present these reports back to people, or?
Well, we also use some of the Commetric data for the new starters. We have a class for new starters as they come on board, and we use a lot of the Commetric data just to talk about how actually, there is quite a lot of presence and brand awareness out there in the market. So that's always very helpful too.
Okay, excellent. Okay. I have another question here saying, has this metrics programme shortened your annual communications planning process?
I think it really helps inform the communications planning. And of course, the fact that we integrate it into the agency review cycle and that it is part of an ongoing dialogue, I think that really does help. The annual comms planning process, I wouldn't say we have a defined timescale within which that operates. So I wouldn't say that it's actually shortened it per se, but it does enable us to have a really good sort of stock take, really, of what's happened over the course of the past 6 months, which does help us to look at what we can do then over the next 6 months.
And I guess also in terms of how long is your comms planning? Comms planning happens all the time, doesn't it?
Oh, yes.
So this helps you react to things very quickly, should you need to. As you were saying about the unknown speakers that sometimes you find that you didn't know were out there speaking.
Hopefully very few of those.
Yeah. Helps you fine-tune that approach to not going forward. Okay. I have another question here. Is the measurement programme used across Verizon markets internationally?
So it's used for Verizon outside the US, so for the enterprise markets around the globe, but outside the US.
Right, okay. And how long did it take to roll out this programme with local markets? What would you...
Well, many years ago, there was quite a lot of time and effort put into actually working out what it was we wanted to measure and why and how.
Yeah, okay.
And then kind of discussing that, sharing that out as we brought agencies on board, because it does really then feed into the SOWs. And then obviously making sure that the data is all available as a monthly snapshot as it does come through. So I mean, from that perspective, actually, it's been something which has been then evolving as we've gone on over time. So every year we do tweak it. We do make sure that it's actually still right for what we want to do. So it's kind of an ongoing process, really. But again, it comes down to sort of the transparency of what it is that we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot, isn't there, of, I was going to say negotiation, but something, it's communication, I guess, with your local markets about where they want to measure, isn't there? Because I know we've done lots of work on fine-tuning the sources that we're measuring and so on.
Yeah.
As your markets feed back to you about, because obviously these landscapes, the media landscape's always changing, isn't it?
Yes.
It's something you have to, there's lots of backs and forwards upon.
Yeah.
Because I know we've worked with a lot of other companies, such as yourself, who sometimes when things are managed from central office, there will be pushback from the local offices. So it's really how you negotiate any tension there. And it sounds like it's via a process of ongoing communication and not just broadcasting what's going to happen, but also listening to what their input is.
Well, and hopefully that's how it's perceived as well from our agency network.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I think we've got some more coming in here. Oh, this is a question for Commetric. How do you select which KPIs are right for the client programme, as there are so many to choose from? What are the tips for choosing the correct ones? I think Jo has really, she's mentioned this many times through the presentation about the importance of defining what you want to measure at the outset, and that being quite a big process at the beginning, and an intentionally involved process, which can be refined as time goes on, but it's really gives you a jump start to outline the objectives at the beginning. So, for example, with Jo, it's very important to know where spokespeople are being quoted, what they're saying, how many times, which of her spokespeople are getting the cut through. It's also very important to track things like their publications. They have very, very significant publications in industry, very significant publications that are very important to industry, and it's very important to track the cut through of those. So all of those sorts of metrics we have to understand at the beginning. We need to understand what's important to the business, and what are the best metrics to reflect the achievement of those objectives, basically. Okay, we've got one more question here. If we're still using media mentions as part of the evaluation of PR activities in 5 years' time, we'll probably be out of a job. How do you measure outcomes, not just media hits? Okay, so this is interesting. So this is, how do you measure the impacts upon the business? I mean, obviously that's the holy grail for any communications campaign, is to measure ultimately the impact on sales or behaviour change, or again, whatever the objective is for that organisation. And it can be difficult to do, particularly with an organisation of Verizon's size. Jo, do you have any comment on that about?
Well, I think that's really something like what we were talking about with the data breach report, and where we can look at sort of coverage over time and penetration over time. That's where that comes in. Mm-hmm. So we can see that actually the data breach report does become something which is referred to as a key tool by people across the security industry. So it's not just a one-time hit.
Yeah.
And then I think, you know, when you look at the outcomes section of the AMEC framework as well, there's a whole number of different aspects which are within that. So that's where actually looking at this in conjunction with the other teams across the business, that's where that all comes together. Yeah. So are we driving attendance at an event or something like that, working alongside our marketing colleagues? Yeah. You know, there's a whole load of integrated activities there which aren't specifically part of this report,
no,
but which are reported on across other areas of business.
So this has to feed into, and this is where you're saying that this report has to be robust enough to feed into those tracking exercises.
Yes, and so, you know, we'll use data from this report to feed into other areas, but not all of this data will inform, you know, absolutely everything that we need to know from the business.
Yeah.
So we can pull in different things from different sources as well. In fact, I've seen there's another question just come in which asks if the programme includes social. So we do track it within our scorecard, things like blog placements and stuff like that we've done in our executive names. But as I mentioned, we actually have a standalone social programme. And that's again, we get snapshot reports on that on a monthly basis, and we get ongoing segment reports as required, which look at all of the standard social metrics too. But that tends to look, well, first of all, we then can look at the overall Verizon brand presence in social overall, but then we can also break it down, so we can look at specific stories, we can launch at specific topics, specific contexts. So we do have social, but again, this is not what this report is for. This is very much focused on the impact of the enterprise business programme across those markets.
Yeah, okay. It's that slightly more complicated navigating the different international markets, isn't it, and bringing it together in a one cohesive measurement platform that this does. And it's interesting you're saying as well about the data breach investigations report and how it is an indication of trust, isn't it, in a way, the way that it's becoming increasingly referred to by journalists, by other stakeholders, by other commentators in the media. So it will be referred to as by third-party spokespeople. Okay, so we've still got some questions coming through here. Looking at this measurement programme in the wider Verizon culture, can you say anything about the measurement performance culture at Verizon? How has the culture changed? And has this comms measurement programme been part of that cultural shift in the wider organisation? Interesting. So I guess this is saying, have you seen more generally a trend towards more measurement in your organisation?
I was having a conversation on just this topic yesterday evening. So it's a constant topic of conversation, and it's a constant evolving programme, really. So we're always looking to see how we can do things better and to see how we can better measure our performance and also report back on performance back into the business. So we are, in fact, working at the moment on what our future KPI is going to be. We are looking at how we can perhaps integrate some of our tracking overall more efficiently. So yes, we are keen as a culture on measurement, but it's something which we are discussing all the time and as to how we can do things better. But I think it's also important to make sure as well, though, that we have some continuity so that we don't have too much change from one year to the next. So making sure that we fit measurement within the overall objectives of what we're trying to achieve. I think that's also important as well.
Yeah, okay. So you don't lose sight of what the primary goal is for the measurement. Yeah, interesting. I think I missed one there. Oh, you mentioned you're also tracking influencers. Could you elaborate? How is this data used and how do you track these?
Well, so again, there's a number of different programs which happen across the business. So, for example, our analyst team will be tracking how we are performing with regards to the industry analysts. We have social influencers that we're tracking through the social media program. There's a whole host of different influencers in different areas that we're looking at. So again, this doesn't necessarily come out of this program, but it's certainly something that we're aware of across the organisation as a whole and have different tracking mechanisms just to make sure that we are hitting those right people in the right ways. Yeah,
and we've also talked about influencer network analysis in the past, haven't we?
Yes.
And doing some work around stakeholders and who is central to the network of influence.
Yes.
Around a certain topic and so on. That's something that we do quite a lot of at Commetric. Is influence network analysis. Okay. Seems to be a pause on the questions. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, hopefully that has been interesting and informative for people on the call. If you do have any follow-up questions or you'd like to reach out and speak to either Joe or myself, we'd be more than happy to speak to you. Of course, this presentation is also available as a recording, so if you'd like to share with any colleagues or associates, then please do so. We'll be sending a follow-up email after this session. Thanks very much for your time. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Jo for her time today and a great run through of the work and how it fits into the business. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
everybody for joining us.
Okay, bye.